Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome into our KSL Stream Center. I am Shara Park. Happy Monday to you. Welcome in on a very thoughtful, meaningful discussion here on a Monday. For nearly 15 years, Utah has attracted national attention and really accolades for leading out on a very important issue here in our state, in our country, really, immigration. And we have been known for a compact here in Utah called the Utah Compact. 120 leaders, government leaders, business leaders, community leaders, they signed the Utah Compact back in 2010 to influence the tone of immigration in our state, the principles, the guiding principles that we wanted to lead out in the state of Utah and to really influence immigration policy in our country. And it's something that has influenced policy across our country and made a difference in the lives of many Americans. And it's something that we want to revisit here in the state of Utah and here in our newsroom. And we have been doing that this week, and we're going to really dive into it here in our newsroom. And I've got with me Deanie Wimmer, who is joining us from remotely. And Deanie, hi, thank you so much for taking some time this morning to join us, because you are kicking off our coverage here this week on this very important topic as we look back on the Utah Compact to decide and look at whether it is still relevant today. Looking at that very important topic, that question. Some people might not even remember or know about the Utah Compact, right?
Exactly. And just what you just said is the twofold reason why we did this. We want people in our state to remember that we have been a leader. We have shown that both sides can come together on this. We've shown that you can make productive policy and things that benefit the people who live in the state. And then likewise, we wanted to see if our leaders and the original signers of that compact still believed in it, still thought that it was important enough to uphold the principles that they worked out so long ago, and whether they still thought there was a place for them.
Okay, so when we look back on the Utah Compact, describe to folks who might not remember it, what it was intended to do. And as you went back to do this story, who did you go talk to?
So when we looked at it, it was the who's who in government, in business, in nonprofit, community leaders. And you had them, they had wrestled with this issue. They'd seen what was happening in other states. And just to remind you of the time, the context is important, because in Arizona, for example, they had passed a really strict law talking about law enforcement was required to ascertain the legal status of somebody if they had reasonable doubt to believe that they were in the country illegally. And you can imagine the broad range of those interpretations. There were protests in the streets. There were the Phoenix Suns, the basketball team, were wearing jerseys at their games that were showing support to immigrants. It was just a time when our state leaders saw some of the ugly things that were happening in other states and wanted to avoid that, wanted to have a more positive way forward. They got together, they hammered out a document that had 5 principles. It went back and forth for a long time, but they ultimately agreed on these 5 principles. They signed the document on a day outside of the Capitol. They all came together to sign it, to make a very public show of support of going forward. And it has been something in the interim that has actually benefited Utahns in terms of economics for our state.
What was so surprising about me, Deanie, about this compact was that it was so simple. When I went back and reread it, I was expecting to pull up a document that was going to be so detailed and so just long and long-winded. It wasn't that. It was very simple in its wording.
It has basic principles. The compact looks at at immigration as a federal issue. It involves law enforcement, it involves families, economics, and a free society. And those are the things that everyone could agree on, that you need the rule of law, but you need compassion for families. These are things that they could agree on, and that's where we started, was we all have differences, but we can agree on these 5 principles, and that's where they came together. So to do the story, we went back to some of those original signers. For the governor, We went back to, and many of them were in different roles. Jenny Wilson, who's now the county mayor. We went back to Derek Miller, who's now with the chamber, but who then was chief of staff for Governor Herbert. Things like that. And so they have since, in that 15 years, they have since gathered together to reaffirm. They've re-signed the compacts in 2019 to show that it was still relevant then, and to bring in a lot of the people who were in different roles, different positions, to lend their support. And there have even been some people now, some of those original signers now, who are wondering, would this be a good time to reaffirm it, since we find ourselves in a very similar environment?
Yeah, we are seeing ourselves in that similar environment right now. Okay, let's take a look at what Deanie has found as we look back 15 years later on the Utah Compact and what she has found. If you're joining us here in the KSL Stream Center, you can weigh in on our YouTube page, on our Facebook page, if you remember the original signing of this compact, and see where we stand today. Take a look. Well, let's see if we can get this package to play. 1 second, Deanie. Here we go.
It was a remarkable moment given the political landscape of 2010. The immigration debate grew increasingly hostile. Our neighbor to the south, Arizona, passed a law that obligated police to determine someone's immigration status if there was reasonable suspicion a person was in the country illegally.
Everybody across America is watching Arizona right now, and the violence is off the chart.
That contention actually motivated leaders in Utah to find a more tempered approach.
And you could feel some of the same turmoil, controversy, unrest that was being felt in Arizona coming to Utah. And Utah leaders didn't want that.
Let's establish what we think are the important principles that ought to be followed with immigration reform.
Community, business, and religious leaders spent months working on wording, and more than 100 organizations signed the final document.
It set Utah apart.
It certainly did set Utah apart.
We stood out as a state to say, we're going to be reasonable in our approach.
The 5 guiding principles of the Utah Compact for Immigration Reform: federal solutions, law enforcement, support for families, the economy, and a free society.
Should we keep families together? Absolutely. Should we enforce the rule of law? Absolutely. Can we do it in a compassionate way? Yes.
That Utah way, forging our own policy path, set a tone for lawmakers, and the compact put Utah in the national spotlight.
It was praised by the left, it was praised by the right, and then there were a lot of states that tried to replicate it,
including Texas, Florida, Colorado, Nebraska, and Kansas.
What I hear people say...
Fast forward to today, is there still broad support for the Utah Compact? The governor says yes.
The Utah Compact, do you still support it?
I do. Yeah, I believe in the Utah Compact. I believe in the reasons behind it.
But others aren't so sure.
We've shifted away perhaps from the principles of the compact.
Some original signers are calling for another signing of the Utah Compact to offset the negative rhetoric.
I think it would be good if we could reaffirm once again that that's the Utah way.
The Utah way may not be enough to bring leaders back to the signing table, but economic realities might.
Has it impacted business in Utah?
It stabilized our workforce, which is so critical to our economy.
As one of the fastest growing states, economists say we need immigrants.
Immigrants are a huge part of our economy.
There are more than 304,000 immigrant residents in Utah that contribute $1.2 billion in state and local taxes. The Salt Lake Chamber says immigrant entrepreneurs bring in $650 million to our state's economy. Recognizing the impact, state lawmakers tried to follow up on the Utah Compact with laws that allowed migrant visas and work permits, but they were challenged in federal court on the grounds they overstepped federal jurisdiction. And that underscores the need for federal policy on immigration.
Okay, Deanie. So tell me a little bit more about that discussion with the governor. I'm curious. So do we need another compact today? Do we lean towards that?
I don't get a sense that we're leaning towards that. I do get a sense that they want to remember, and they want us to remember what we've done, our history, so that we can keep keep those principles and keep the benefits that came along with that. Our state has a unique history of immigration and welcoming immigrants, not only from our far history, but even in recent history. On that day that I interviewed Jenny Wilson, there were 2 naturalization ceremonies in Salt Lake County, welcoming 70 new residents to our country. This has been a place where immigrants who are in war-torn countries can be relocated and can get a new life and can become contributing members of our society. And they want us to remember that. They want us to remember the need for workers in our fast-growing economy. And these are realities that come along with the emotions of the argument.
Yeah, yeah. You know, all week long, we're going to have different stories exploring the Utah Compact and what it means here in our state. What can you tell us about some of the other coverage we're going to see this week?
I know you're talking with Daniel in a minute. He's talked to our congressional delegation. You know, that's really where it starts, because we have gone on, our state has gone on to pass laws that would address some of these things in the Utah Compact. For example, work visas and things, as you heard in the story. But we've been stopped because it's a federal issue, but we can't get the federal government to then act. And so it's created a real cog for development and for progress. We're also looking at the economy. I've interviewed several people. I have a story later this week that talks about the economic realities of immigrants. You saw just that piece of $1 billion in economic impact. Those are things every state faces, and we need progress development on those fronts. The family issue, what this does to families, some who are here perhaps not legally, some who are here legally, and you've seen those stories that we've done in the last few weeks ourselves. You've done some of them, Shara, that where families who are here legally are still being threatened, and if not in reality, at least in perception. And then we're also looking at free society. We wrap it up by looking at how we treat immigrants says a lot about us as a society, as a community, in addition to what it just, what it says, how we treat them says a lot about us. And given our history, the bar ought to be higher in Utah.
Yeah, when you mentioned those families, I was thinking of in Midvale, or as you mentioned, covering those families who received those letters, at this point still unverified whether they actually came from Homeland Security, but just as a scare tactic, trying to get these families who are here legally, trying to get them scared enough that they will be trying to flee our country. Again, these are families who are here legally with those visas, trying to scare them out of our country. There's a lot that is happening when it comes to immigration with our country, and these families who are trying to live here and to make a life here. So there is a lot to talk about, and the Utah Compact is a major part of that as Utah tries to set a tone for that discussion. And we have been a state who has led out and tried to set that tone. So I appreciate you revisiting that for us, Deanie, as we try to set that discussion for the week and these stories as we dive into them this week. Deanie, thank you for taking a few minutes for us to set that up for us. We appreciate it. As you mentioned, we do have Daniel Woodruff, who is standing by for us. Deanie, I'm going to let you go and say thank you for that. I'm going to bring Daniel into the discussion with us. Daniel, you do have a piece of this that I want you to set up for us. So you're talking about the federal level of this. You went back to Washington, I understand, to have these discussions. Is that correct?
I did, Shara. So we went to Washington, D.C. a little bit ago, and it was with the idea that we wanted to talk to our congressional delegation, our 2 senators and our 4 members of the U.S. House of Representatives, to talk about not only the issue of immigration, but also kind of touching on what Deanie looked at in her story is the big question, is the Utah Compact still relevant today? And I think, Shara, we've got some of the clips of the answers to those questions about the issue generally and about the Compact specifically.
Okay, before we play those, tell me who you talked to and why specifically you talked to those individuals. So what were you trying to target with those individuals specifically?
Yeah, we reached out to we have 6 congressional members. We have 2 senators and 4 House members. We ended up talking with 5 of the 6, and that's Representative Blake Moore from the 1st District, Representative Celeste Malloy from the 2nd District, Representative Mike Kennedy, brand new congressman representing the 3rd District of Utah, and then Representative Burgess Owens in the 4th District. We also had an extensive interview with Senator John Curtis, who was in the House and now he's in the Senate. Disappointingly, we had reached out multiple times to Utah Senator Mike Lee. He's Utah's senior senator. He's been in office since 2011, right after the compact was signed. We really wanted to get his insights about the issue, but his office never agreed to an interview.
Is there a specific question you were going after? I know the big question is the Utah compact still relevant, but is there one particular individual who might have more of a hold on this than another, that might have more of a, I don't know, like a more weight to the conversation?
Well, I think the question, is the Utah Compact still relevant, is important, but we also wanted to ask, because this is a federal concern, what is the federal government going to do? And you have to recognize our delegation is a small part of the massive
the big
makeup.
hog.
There are 435 members in the U.S. House of Representatives. There are 100 senators. So you do the math, 6 out of 535 is pretty small.
Yeah, but we got a big voice.
However, I was going to say that.
I'm not a big voice in this.
I'm not just saying this because we live in Utah. The voice of Utah on immigration has been strong in the past, and I really wanted to find out, can Utah help play a role in eventually getting the federal government to do something, because there has not been major immigration reform since the mid-1980s.
Okay, let's listen to what Daniel was able to find out from our Utah lawmakers.
Are you frustrated seeing Congress essentially abdicating one of its major responsibilities?
I can't tell you that I'm more frustrated about anything as much as that. It's incredibly frustrating. It's one of the biggest disappointments of my time here.
We need to work on a legal immigration process, and that's a lot of what the Utah Compact talks about, is economic incentives and treating people as humans.
I think the Utah model, the Utah way, would be a good place to have part of that conversation.
I think the most relevant part of the compact is that it recognizes that it's a federal concern.
I love the Utah Compact. I'm hopeful because I believe in the steps that we're taking right now to make sure we're getting the border under control.
Okay, I hear the answers. I expect those answers from Utah lawmakers. With that said, what else are they saying?
Yeah, I mean, it's when you go back to your original question about maybe the idea of what can Utah do. When I talked to Senator John Curtis, he's got a much bigger voice now in the Senate than he did in the House, and I was really curious about his thoughts, because all of a sudden he's elevated to a pretty high position in the Senate and has been able to kind of position himself in a way that people really do listen to what he has to say. And I know he pushes back against the idea that he's moderate, but he has come to Congress with maybe some more maverick style tendencies than we've seen in other members of our delegation. And so I was really curious what he in particular thought. And you can see the frustration in that clip there, Shara, where he has been a supporter of a number of proposals that would maybe move the needle on immigration, but it's so hard to get anything done. And so my story, which airs tonight on KSL 5 News at 10, really looks at this idea of what is it going to take to get the ball rolling, because we have waited and waited and waited. We have seen proposal after proposal go through and nothing has ever happened. Some have gotten very close. I know last year there was a proposal that really died in the 11th hour, and there were a number of reasons thrown around as to why it died, but it has taken so long to get to the point where we are today, where we're still just waiting for the federal government to take action. And I thought Deanie's comments were really insightful, because Utah tried to do things about this with worker visas and such, and to only be told, no, you cannot, because the federal government is in charge. And it's frustrating for our own delegation to look at the past decades and see nothing's occurred, nothing's changed.
Yeah, in terms of the Utah Compact and how it has influenced other states, Daniel, I know that this has been, immigration is a topic that you have covered extensively on behalf of our state as well. Where have we influenced other states? What have you seen?
Well, I was interested, and I'll be honest, I didn't realize how many states had kind of followed Utah's lead until I saw Deanie's story last night when it aired, and we just replayed it. But there are a number of states that did their own compacts, right? But I think the issue is you look at some states, and it's a very hard-handed approach. Let's deal with only maybe one aspect of immigration, like enforcement. I think the Utah Compact, when you look at it, it is encompassing. It talks about enforcement, but it also talks about the value that immigrants bring. It also talks about whose responsibility this is in the first place. So Utah Compact really aims, I think, to be something that is more than just a one-issue approach to the problem or another issue. It tries to bring in all the different concerns because this is so multifaceted. Maybe at the end of the day, that's why nothing's happened, because you can get on board with one part of it, but it's hard to get on board with all of it.
Yeah, it's a really complicated subject. I do want to go over some of the stories we are going to see this week as we talk about this Dream Divided, this topic that we have here this week. Okay, so your story tonight, go over quickly again what we're going to see, just a little synopsis of it for us.
Yeah, Principle 1, Federal Solutions. So you even see the video here. It lists the 5 principles. That top one there, Federal Solutions, which lays out that this is a federal issue, which is why we went back to Washington, D.C. We took the time and expense to go out there to spend a couple of days talking to our congressional leaders about not only the role Utah might be able to play, but why this issue hasn't budged for a long time. So that's really what my story aims to tackle, is Principle 1 of the Utah Compact.
Okay, and then on Tuesday night, we're going to have compact law enforcement. We'll have Daniela Rivera talking about, the issues that law enforcement find themselves in as they're looking at this compact, exploring their role, their perspective that they play in this as well. Then on Wednesday, Garna Mejia will have a story about families, what they are facing when it comes to immigration and how they are trying to balance the complications that they face with immigration and what they're trying to do and trying to navigate the complexities of that as well. We've got what Deanie talked about. She has another story on Thursday about the economy, what the compact, how that plays into it as well. And then on Friday, Free Society. 15 years after it was written, do the ideals of the Utah Compact still impact our community and culture and offer a roadmap for the future? And so a lot of just thoughtful journalism going into this week when we look at the Utah Compact and is it still relevant 15 years later? And as a state, do we need to look at maybe a new compact or revisiting this compact? So a lot of good journalism happening this week here at KSL, and we appreciate the reporters here in our newsroom who are looking at this topic and just looking at how this impacts all different facets of life here in the state of Utah. So Daniel, thank you for your time. Thanks, you for your going back to Washington and taking it to our lawmakers and really bringing it back to the doorstep and asking them how they feel about this today and how this is relevant to folks here in our community.
Yeah, no problem.
We appreciate it. All right, folks, thanks for joining us here in the KSL Stream Center. Of course, look for all that coverage over on KSLTV.com as well. We will continue to update you on all that information there. So, Daniel, thanks so much. We'll see everybody over on KSL TV on we've got the noon show coming up. What time is it right now? 10:38. So just here in just a little bit. All right, everybody, thanks so much. We'll see ya.